Immaculate Heart of Mary Church in Hayes.
I invite you just for a moment to call to mind the people that you serve as councillors in Hillingdon, to call to mind the issues that touch their lives, the services that Hillingdon Council offers to respond to those needs. Let's pray we would have the wisdom this evening to discern in effective and efficient ways solutions to those challenges that face our community. I invite you, if you know the words, to join with me the words that come from Jesus himself as we say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you. Okay, can we move on to item 1? Are there any apologies?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have apologies from Councillors Ahmad Walana, Chapman, Horangi, Jackson, Lakmana, Oswell and Seaman Digby.
Thank you. Can we agree the minutes of the meeting dated the 12th of September 2019? Is that agreed? Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? None. Thank you. Now we come to item 4, which is the Mayor's announcements. There are some serious ones and some happy ones. Can I congratulate Councillor Janet Gardner, who is the Ward Councillor for Botwell, who has been honoured for her work supporting victims of domestic violence and domestic abuse. Councillor Gardner won the Innovation and Service Transformation category at the 2019 Councillor Achievements Award. I think that deserves a bit of applause. Janet. And now I want to report, this should have been done at the last council meeting, but of course we had a general election which interrupted that. I'd like to report the death of Charles Key, an ex-councillor and a freeman of the borough in 2007. He passed away on the 19th of November, aged 94. Could I ask you all to stand for a minute's silence, please? Thank you. Another serious Mayor's announcement that I'd like to inform the Council that Jill Rhodes, an ex-councillor and mayor in 2005-2006, is very, very seriously ill at this time. I can't say any more than that, only that I'm sending a card from the council and appropriate flowers. We managed to do, to date, all the 444 visits, even with the interruptions of the general election, and that goes for both the mayor and the deputy mayor. We obviously had to cancel the last council meeting for the purpose of the election, and we also had to cancel the quiz night as well, so we're a little bit behind ourselves there, and we're just getting back on track again after Christmas and the New Year. So can I remind all members of the council that it's charity quiz night in the Middlesex Suite on Wednesday the 22nd of January, and I look forward to seeing as many of you as we can to try and make up the difference between not having it because of the election and building our resources up at the beginning of this year. That's it for the Mayor's announcements. We now move on to the main part of the meeting, which is item 5, which is questions from members of the public. Question 5.1 is from Mr. Tony Ellis, but I understand that he is not here this evening, so can I ask Councillor Burrows if he would give him a written response to that?
Mr. Mayor, I will get a written response sent to Mr. Ellis, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 5.2 was from Mr. Trevor Shirling, who I assume is here. Mr. Shirling, if you would like to ask your question, and Councillor Burrows, when he's finished, if you could answer it for him.
Thank you. When planning enforcement open a case following a complaint, it is not usual for them to report back to the complainant on the findings. Surely residents have the right to be so informed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Shirling, for your question. The Council's planning enforcement team do report back to complainants with the findings of each investigation, whether this is to advise that a breach has been voluntarily resolved, a notice has been served, or other form of action has been taken. However, sometimes, because of the processes that must be followed, the time between updates can be quite long. For instance, planning appeals against enforcement notices can take between 6 and 12 months for external appointed planning inspectors to make a decision. We are currently investigating improving our ICT and web pages so that more detailed case updates can be viewed online by complainants. We are also, through the Council's communications team, widely publicising successful prosecutions to ensure these act as a deterrent against residents breaching planning regulations. Next month's Hillingdon People will have features on a number of recent planning enforcement prosecutions where substantive fines have been imposed by the courts. This includes a recent case where a Hayes landlord had been ordered to pay more than £430,000 under the Proceeds of Crime Act after turning her property into an illegal house of multiple occupation. This particular case was also reported in both the Evening Standard and Metro newspapers. I hope you can see that we are moving to make this a much more ICT-based system for residents, and we do respond when there are things to tell them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We now move on to item 6, which is the report of the Head of Democratic Services, Councillor Puddiford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are 4 parts to this report, and I will deal with each part individually. The first item is for Council to note the use of urgency decisions made since those noted at our last Council meeting, and these are as detailed in the agenda. I move that these decisions are noted.
Mr. Mayor, I formally second, reserve my right.
Mr. Mayor, it will not have escaped members' attention that a general election was held last month and that the Deputy Leader of this Council, Councillor David Simmons, was elected as the MP for Ruislip, Northland and Pinner constituency, and I'm sure members will join me in congratulating him. Councillor Simmonds has provided outstanding service to both this council and local government at a national level. Whilst his election to Parliament is a loss at local level for Hillingdon, it is an undoubted gain for the national government and the constituents of Rysept, Norford and Penna. Mr Mayor, I give notice tonight that at an appropriate future meeting of the Council, to mark his outstanding service to this borough and its residents, Councillor David Simmonds will be made a freeman of this borough. Councillor Simmonds' election has necessitated me choosing a new Deputy Leader of Council, and that position will be filled by Councillor Jonathan Bianco. I've also taken the opportunity of reviewing cabinet portfolios, and as we have for some time had one of the smallest cabinets in London, increasing the cabinet membership by one. Details of portfolio titles and responsibility changes are detailed in Appendix A. One of the main changes in responsibilities is the recognition of the work that we will all have to do relating to our environment and the effects of climate change. Accordingly, climate change will now be included as a specific responsibility for the Cabinet Member for Housing and the Environment, Councillor Philip Cawthorne. There will be two new members joining Cabinet, being Councillor Susan O'Brien as Cabinet Member for Education, Children and Youth Services, and Councillor Jane Palmer as Cabinet Member for Social Care, Health and Wellbeing. Congratulations. A complete list of positions and portfolios is shown in the agenda. Mr Mayor, whilst the membership of Cabinet and portfolio responsibilities falls to me as Leader of the Council, as included for information and noting, there are a few minor consequential amendments to the Constitution, shown on pages 47 to 49 of the agenda, which require the agreement of Council, and I formally move that these amendments are approved.
Well, Mr Mayor, I formally second. Normally these are purely procedural items. Rather than reserving my right on this occasion, I would like to say a personal thank you to the Leader for what he's just said, and a big thank you to all of my colleagues, not just in the Conservative group, but on all sides in this chamber, and also to the Council officers who've done a fantastic job and played an important part, a vital part, in the progress that Hillingdon has made. Mr Mayor, on this occasion, after 18 years occupying the chair next to the Leader, I'm sure neither of us look a day older than we did when we first occupied those seats, it is an opportunity to say not just a big congratulations, but to welcome two new members into the roles that they're going to occupy. I know Councillor Bianco has now served an 18-year apprenticeship to become Deputy Leader of this group in succession not just to myself, but to you, Mr Mayor, and to Councillor Mills on my left. A fine body of people, no doubt. But in particular, I'd like to welcome Councillor O'Brien taking over responsibilities around education and children's social care in this borough. We've been on a journey of improvement. There will be many challenges ahead, but it is in positive shape, and therefore I'm delighted to second the nominations and recommendations of our new Cabinet members as outlined on the audit paper.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, first of all, we welcome that the Cabinet portfolios have been expanded to some more manageable portfolios. Also welcome the introduction of two women on the Cabinet. About time, I think, but two very good, capable women, might I add. We look forward to having a review of the overview and scrutiny committees so that they align with the new structure of the Cabinet so that the scrutiny function can be more effective. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Are there any other speakers? Is that agreed? Thank you.
Mr Mayor, the new Cabinet appointments have a knock-on effect in committee membership and the position of Chairman and Vice Chairman of a number of committees. Council is asked to note the proposed new committee Chairman and Vice Chairman and approve the Conservative Party changes to Conservative Group membership as detailed on the agenda. I so move.
Mr Mayor, I formally second and reserve my right.
Finally, Mr Mayor, Council is asked to approve the timetable of meetings for the municipal year 2021 as set out in Appendix B to the report. I move the recommendation.
Mr Mayor, I formally second and reserve my right.
Is that agreed? Great. Thank you. We now move on to item 7, polling district and polling place review. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally move the recommendation on page 53 of the agenda regarding the polling district and polling places review, which, as is documented, sets out a confirmation of polling places that will remain in place up until 2022, and then the polling places that will come into existence when the new ward boundaries and the reduction in number of councillors in this authority begins, when we go from our existing number of 65 down to 53, and therefore corresponding reduction in wards and the need for as many polling places. I won't go through each one individually because it's been on public record now and lodged with the various groups, and there was lots of consultation time as well, but I will just make a point that I'm particularly pleased that in terms of Pinkwell ward, we've now managed to find a third place, even though technically it's just outside the boundary of the new proposed Pinkwell ward. It will actually serve as a much better reallocation of where those residents go, rather than trying to get all of them into the two polling stations, which has been the challenge, and I know not been absolutely ideal, that we've had in existence for a number of years now. So I formally move.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Lewis?
Mr. Mayor, I formally second the motion and reserve my right. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Milani?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted, on behalf of the Labour Group, to place on record our disappointment that there is no polling station at Brunel University. Many members of the Council will know that Brunel University and its students and staff have a special place in the borough, and given that we have over 13,000 students on that campus, of which nearly 5,000 live on campus, and we know for sure that there is certainly the infrastructure to host a polling station on that campus, and that the review states that it wishes the polling places to be accessible to all electors, it would make sense to me and to the Labour Group, in order to give the power specifically to young people, to students and to staff on Brunel University campus, the power to go and vote and have their voices heard, that a polling station would make sense at Brunel. This has been a call that has been long made from my days as a student all the way to the consultation now, from students and from staff. So I just wanted to formally note on the record our extreme disappointment that there is, once again, no ballot station on Brunel University campus.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Dillon?
Just a point of order, really, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I'd just like to say to all members that if you're going to heckle, why don't you just get up and speak rather than heckle and put everyone else off? So, just to make that point. Well, there was someone talking over it and making a comment, Mr. Mayor, and I just think they should have the guts to speak if they want to get up and speak. Quite rude.
Please allow me to make the order. I didn't hear any. If I heard it, I would have kept order, but I did not hear that.
Well, first of all, I'm pleased that Councillor Milani has the time to continue to concentrate on his student union activities. And secondly, in terms of Brunel, I think we need to get some of the facts straight. It was given due consideration. Indeed, there are over 13,000 students, but vast numbers of them are not actually resident there or living in the borough. They come to and fro. And indeed, in terms of the registration that the general election has just brought forward, the total number of increased residents from the whole of the Brunel ward, not just from the campus, was less than 1,000. Plus, I think we need to recognise, and this is the distinction, we are deciding polling stations for all residents of Hillingdon, whether over the age of 18, entitled to vote at elections, not just for one segment of a population who happen to be, it is a significant part of our community, and that is very much recognised, but there is no need to go out of our way to make a specific need for just one small segment when we're looking at the whole of the residents within that one area, and the decision that we've made to keep the polling district at the place where we have successfully run elections for a long time has proved to be the common sense answer as a result of the review. And on that basis, that's why Brunel was considered and not put forward, and that's why we are recommending what we are recommending.
All those agreed? Good. Item 8, council tax base and business rates. Councillor Bianco.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just come in just before Councillor Bianco gets up. The some of you will notice that on page 115, the table there didn't come out in its proper size, and that's why you've been produced in a replica of that table tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, this, of course, is the most exciting agenda item to hit the Council every year. It is to do with the Council tax base and business rates forecast. The recommendations are all contained on page 109. The important piece of information, however, is contained at the bottom of page 110, which is that the movement in Band D households, and that is an important aspect for the Council. The more Band D, the more council tax we collect. This year the movement is an upward one of just over 1,200 from new developments and 200 from associated changes through the reduction scheme. This is good news for us, and the formula, which I'm sure you all understood, at the top of page 110 is how it's all worked out. I won't test anyone tonight. It is significant, of course, that the sheet that has been circulated and was obviously misprinted in the document has been rectified so that everybody could catch up. Anyway, Mr. Mayor, I move the recommendations on page 109.
Is that seconded?
Mr. Mayor, I second and reserve my right.
Are there any further questions? Is it agreed? Good. You're zerking along. Item 9, the statement of gambling policy. Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Cabinet received a report back in its October meeting on our gambling policy, and after consultation, and as a result of that, bearing in mind the number of changes in legislation that the gambling policy needed to reflect in terms of titles and descriptions of certain things, our gambling policy has therefore been updated, and we have taken on board some of the comments from that consultation, as is set out here, as improving the policy to make it clearer, so that when matters are being discussed and considered by licensing committee, then it's very, hopefully much clearer in terms of how the gambling policy should be deployed. And in that respect, I move the recommendation, which is on page 139 of tonight's report.
Is that seconded? Councillor Lavery.
Mr. Mayor, I formally second and reserve my right.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Lavery, do you want to come back or not? Councillor Mills. Is that agreed? Item 10, which is the adoption of the local plan part 2. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following the Cabinet meeting on 17th of December, I bring to Council this evening Hillingdon's Local Plan Part 2 for adoption. As you can see, Mr. Mayor, I have a copy on my desk. I tend to take you through all appendices. No, don't worry. The plan has taken into account the comments received from the Inspector and residents during consultation. And then, following alterations, the Inspector's report concluded our plan to be sound and fit for adoption. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank officers of this Council for their efforts in producing the plan, which with all the processes involved has been very laborious and time-consuming, something that my Cabinet colleague Councillor Mills alluded to at the 17th of December Cabinet meeting, and asked the newly elected MP for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner to take back to ministers in central government. But where other authorities are still struggling to get inspectors' approval, yet again the planning department of Hillingdon have succeeded. The formal adoption of Local Plan Part 2 this evening would mean the Council has a complete local plan in place to provide the spatial framework for the substantial future growth of the borough, along with all the future developments proposals being assessed against them. I therefore move the recommendations on page 145 that this Council adopt the Local Plan Part 2 and the revised Local Plan Policy Maps. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Tuckwell.
Mr. Mayor, I formally second and reserve my right.
Are there any? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too welcome the receipt of this Local Plan Part 2. It's been a long time coming. We started this original consultation in May 2013, so I think it's a great relief to us all that we are now finally here. I know it has to go through many legal processes and obviously affecting landowners and many interests. Of course, there are thousands often comments. I too would like to thank the staff who I think did a magnificent job on this. I attended the examination in public every day and I think the Council did an excellent job. And I really thank them and applaud them for that. There are many elements in this plan that we welcome. It certainly gives certainty. One of the things we did not welcome at all was the fact that densities have virtually doubled and parts of our borough are suburban. They have been changed and made urban. I know this comes from government and other powers that we have to take on board some of those things, but really it's something I wish we could have resisted more strongly. We're already seeing very high densities. We're already seeing the impact on infrastructure, on health services, on pressures on school places and other areas of the borough. So I was sorry that we lost that battle, but on the whole I very much welcome, and all the Labour group welcomes, this certainty that it gives us in going forward and giving us more control, hopefully, over the development within our borders. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Tuck.
I'm happy with what I've heard, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm bringing to Council yet another proposal for adoption, which I hope will be supported across both sides of this chamber. As I'm sure members are aware, dockless bike hire schemes are becoming very popular across the globe, with some already in place in parts of London and the London boroughs. The key feature of such a scheme is bikes can be picked up and left at any location. However, the negative impact is that bikes can be left in many inappropriate locations, causing access issues and issues for disabled people getting across roads where there should be drop curbs and bikes are just left cluttering the street scene. Currently in Hillingdon, we have no dockless bike schemes operating, and to date neither myself or officers are aware of any aspirations from members to support such schemes. In contrast, however, Hillingdon do support a very successful and well-used Santander docked bike scheme installed at Brunel, Hillingdon Hospital and Uxbridge Town Centre. And this scheme is one of the most well-used schemes of its kind in the whole of the country. In order to control the inappropriate parking of dockless bikes across London, the London Council's Transport and Environment Committee have overseen the drafting of bylaw for the regulation of dockless bikes across London. The draft bylaw has been developed with the input of borough officers by London councils. The intention is all London boroughs introduce a bylaw so the same powers are used uniformly across London. The details are in the report, Mr. Mayor, as well as Appendix A. Although I fully support the use of bikes as an alternative mode of transport, I'm sure, like all councillors, I want to see controls to ensure they are managed properly without any effect and disruption to our residents and our street scene. I therefore move the recommendation shown on page 155. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally second the proposal and reserve my right.
No, Mr. Mayor, happy for the vote.
Item 12, which are motions to cancel. 12.1, Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I start, however, by thanking Hannah Crowther for her petition. She's sitting over there, and I'm pleased to say she's travelled all the way from Leeds University today to hear this. I hope she goes home not too despondent. Mr. Mayor, I'm delighted to propose this motion to the Council tonight. The subject of climate change is one that has hit the headlines around the world with ever-increasing regularity and urgency over the last year or more. And there is now little doubt that the problem is of a sufficient size that it must concern all of us. To be clear, we all have a part to play in it if we're going to resolve it. The future of our planet and the shape we leave it in for future generations is something we can no longer ignore. It has been very easy in the past to push this matter to one side on the basis of leaving it to those who come after us. But in reality, action needs to be taken now. What we can do and how quickly is altogether a stickier question, and one that is not easy to answer fully. It is certainly not something we can hope to do justice to in full in such a short space of time we have tonight for debate. As I've said, action is needed at all levels. At an international level, nation-states need to get behind this. At a national level, governments need to legislate. But also at local government level, we have a role to play. And as individuals, private individuals, we have a role to play there too. As a country, despite our long history, in environmental terms, we are relative minnows. What we do or don't do will only impact the world as a whole in a very minor way. However, taking that approach is no longer valid. We must all make an effort and also persuade others, and in particular the bigger polluters, to join in. 2030 is the generally acknowledged target date by which we need to have achieved carbon neutrality and to be also using 100% clean energy. I believe that for this Council it is entirely possible to achieve that aim, and certainly the clean energy part thereof. It will not be an easy target, but working with our residents, staff and contractors, it should be both possible and realistic. At a council level, I am also pleased to say that we've been doing our bit to reduce our footprint for some time. I don't pretend there isn't much more to do, but we have at least made a start. Perhaps the most obvious example is the replacement of all our existing street lighting with LED units. Not only has that led to significant cost savings to the council, but we have reduced our energy consumption by 54%. And this reduction equates to a 74% reduction in our carbon emissions over the same period. Now, clearly, wins like these are great, but they are relatively few and far between. An example of an area where we have made some progress, but not yet enough, is with our vehicle fleet. The new vehicles we are buying are much more efficient than the ones they replace, and they are much less polluting, but we have not yet been able to make the leap to clean vehicles, whatever they may be. We are trialling electric vehicles within the council, but as yet they do not deliver what we need. No matter how you look at the problem, and in any event, electric vehicles are not the panacea that they may suppose, but in time, I hope we will find alternatives that work. We are already improving energy efficiency across the council where we can and when we get the opportunity. new boilers, lifts and lighting have all made positive impacts to our internal consumption, and externally we are encouraging contractors to work more collaboratively, for example in road repairs, to reduce traffic disruption and consequential CO2 emissions. Idling cars have long been a cause of pollution, and I'm pleased to say that in the last 12 months our environmental enforcement teams have issued more than 900 penalty notices. Now I see I'm running out of time, so I will cut. In next year's budget there will be funding in excess of £5 million to go towards delivering energy efficiencies in our housing stock and corporate buildings. A council-wide energy strategy will be implemented in the near future, and it will have key recommendations on making the council more efficient, and it will help us meet our responsibilities under the 2019 Environment Bill. Mr Mayor, we are aware of what needs to be done. We are already working to a plan. This achievement activity will ramp up in the coming year, and we will achieve our goals of net zero by 2030. All we have to do now is persuade everyone else in the world to join in. Mr Mayor, I move this motion.
Is that seconded?
I formally second, Mr Mayor, and reserve my right.
Councillor Dennis, you signalled.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for allowing me to speak on this motion. For me, this motion is very important for two reasons. Firstly, it puts fighting climate change at the centre of what we do. Hillingdon Council for many years now has understood how important our environment is, so in a sense this is not new. But as Councillor Bianco eloquently stated, this does not mean we should not strive to be better. By having an annual climate change action plan, compelling officers to consider environmental impacts across all projects, and having a cabinet member who has climate change in their title and ownership of this area, we can constantly challenge ourselves as to how we can act in a more environmentally friendly way. I would like to congratulate Councillor Cawthorne for taking on his role in Cabinet. I know this is a subject he cares about, and I know he'll look forward to receiving all our ideas. The second reason why this motion matters is because it is us saying that climate change is happening, that what we put into the air and ground matters, and that it is crucial that we do what we can to protect our planet. I'm really glad that the motion begins with a strong statement that global climate change is real. It is. The science tells us so. You see it on the news, whether that be the fires burning in Australia or floods washing away homes in Bangladesh. We also see it here in Hillingdon, whether it be by tasting the poor quality air near Heathrow Airport or wading through the localised flooding that has arrived this warm winter. As local leaders, it's important that all of us join the dots between these happenings and how we live our lives. It is important for us to do this because most people, and I definitely include myself in this, like to ignore inconvenience of short-term pain even though we know it's needed for long-term gain. There is a fundamental mismatch between how we're encouraged to live our lives and how natural resources need to be treated to maintain ecological sustainability and avert a climate breakdown. I mean, isn't it great that we can get next day delivery? Well, not if it increases carbon emissions and packaging waste. Thanks to fast fashion, we're buying twice as many clothes, which allows me to make twice as many mistakes, but also doubles the amount of fabric that ends up in landfill. It's always tempting to go with easier, but we should always ask ourselves if easier is a better way of using the resources the planet provides us. These are tough challenges, but by declaring a climate emergency, we're saying that these are challenges we must face. To quote Greta Thunberg, the moment we decide to fulfil something, we can do anything. Thank you, Mr Mayor, for allowing me to speak on this motion. For me, this... Oh, sorry. That was going so well, wasn't it? I commend this motion to Council because of what it commits the Council to do, but also what it compels all of us to do to help others, to help our planet breathe. I hope it will receive unanimous support.
Councillor Hensley.
Mr Mayor, many thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I fully endorse the sentiments that's carried in this motion, and I believe and I hope the residents fully appreciate the hard work that has gone on that the Council is making for making our living environment that much better. Unfortunately, there's another side to this, and that is the bigger organisations. Heathrow is one of the biggest pollutants of CO2
per person. In my recent discussions with Heathrow, I asked them, can they please monitor smaller particulates? And the answer is they meet their statutory obligation. Now, 10 parts per million is what they normally are measuring. If you go down to 4 parts or down to 2 parts, those particulates can actually go through the lung wall and into our bloodstream. Very similar like your biscuits you have with hydrogenated fats. Unfortunately, there's the other person that's not helping us, and that is HS2. We're going to be surrounded with a lack of trees that are tremendous oxygen producers. And also there's going to be impact on our transport. And the other point is, I don't think another person's not helping us, that's the London Mayor. Besides, he's never visited this borough, but unfortunately, with the London plan, with high density housing that Councillor just mentioned, any room that is less than 9 metres squared does not have to have a window. So that means a kitchen and a bathroom now relies on artificial lighting, which again puts a burden on energy that's required. That can be overcome if we change the legislation to make sure that all rooms have a window. I also contacted the Mayor's office to get an idea of what are the generators of pollution. 12% of all London air pollutants is generated by transport systems. Central heating is 19%. But the biggest pollutant is concrete. And with London having been covered even more with concrete, you can see where the CO2 producer is. I would also like the Mayor of London to look at our roundabouts. You may think that's a rather simple statement to make, but if you have a dominant leg on a roundabout, and you know the highway code, you have to give way to the traffic on the right. That causes tremendous delays. For me, I couldn't get out of Brunel University on Tuesday night. It took me 20 minutes to get off the campus because the whole place was gridlocked. And also, phased traffic lights.
Can you wind up now, Councillor?
We do not have Long Lane. It's got 10 traffic lights, 2 pedestrian crossings in a mile and a half. Mr. Mayor, I think this motion goes to the heart of what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Councillor Mathers.
Mr. Mayor, I propose the amendment as listed on the order of business. I want to thank the speakers before and agree with the level of challenge we face in tackling climate change, but we can make a difference. I became a vegetarian 13 years ago to reduce my carbon count when I realised the devastating impact that causes climate change, that it was a global issue, particularly affecting the world's poorest. I had to do something and make a difference. Over the last decade, that negative impact from carbon has come to life. We've seen adverse weather changes, poor air quality, melting ice caps, destruction of ecosystems, as fossil fuel emissions mercilessly destroy our atmosphere. The Labour Group welcome the intent of this original motion and commend the Council for the action it's taken in recycling rates, reduced light pollution and other measures. I'm pleased the Council joins many other councils across our country in declaring a climate emergency and committing to being carbon neutral by 2030. However, the good intention of this motion requires amendment due to the level of negative climate impact that the planet faces through temperatures rising. In order to stop global temperatures exceeding an irreversible level, more action is required, both by individuals and organisations, but especially by political decision makers. I came across a meme last week on Instagram which said, we don't need one person taking perfect actions to tackle climate change, but millions of people doing it imperfectly. None of us are perfect. We may strive towards, but we must play our part as those millions of people. Our planet needs ambitious local authorities using influence and spending power to ensure the whole of its areas are carbon zero by 2030. We as a local authority must rise to the challenge of tackling climate change across the whole of Hillingdon. Unfortunately, this motion doesn't go far enough. It lacks ambition and involvement of our residents, which is what our amendment intends to do to bring it to life. This amendment to this motion will raise standards for the whole borough, including its supply chain. We'll look at our investments to make sure we're not investing in devastating fossil fuels, to ensure that we have real power exerted in our contracts and supply chains to ensure they meet the same standards the Council aims to do. This amendment also recognises the contribution of residents through consultation, including the young who will live through the future that our actions, or lack of actions tonight, determines. With this amendment, we commit to transparent public reporting to agree timetables as tackling climate change cannot wait. This amendment joins other local authorities who have been more ambitious, Westminster and Lambeth, in committing to robust measures to reach targets that we can achieve. We must not lack ambition in our efforts. The stakes are too high. We must hold ourselves to higher standards to save our planet. Please support this amendment, and I move it.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Milani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I want to pay tribute to Hannah, who put this together, and to billions of young people around the world. I think it is no exaggeration to say that debates like we're having today in this chamber, in other local councils, in governments and across the world would not be happening if it wasn't for the youth strikers, the school strikers and the young people who put this on the agenda. So I want to start off by giving my tributes to you, Hannah, and to every young person who has made this a priority. I also want to welcome the calls for a climate emergency, a climate crisis, a climate catastrophe that is affecting our world. What this amendment does, amongst other things, is provide the urgency in action for the urgency of the crisis that is ahead of us. And that is, for example, working with relevant agencies across our borough to make sure that they also meet a net zero carbon emissions target by the aims given, that we publicly report on the levels of investments of our pensions and other investments that we make, but also that we work with the public and young people who have the ideas and the energy to make sure that this crisis, this catastrophe, is dealt with in an appropriate way and with the urgency and the vigour that it needs. I think I've seen today that Sir David Attenborough has called the situation we are in a crisis, and the head of Microsoft has worked on making sure that Microsoft becomes carbon negative actually by 2050. But this is not enough. We need to move faster, and we need to move at a rate that is proportional to the crisis ahead of us, because it is only more floods and more catastrophe and lives that are lost and lives that are damaged if we don't take the urgency and the boldness in action that we need. So I hope, amongst other things, that this amendment is not seen as an amendment from a political opponent or from someone from the other side of the aisle, but contributions to how we can make sure that this climate catastrophe and this climate emergency is met with the boldness in action and in urgency that we need. So I second this motion. Thank you. This amendment.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, just for clarification of everybody in the room, we're now discussing the version of the motion shown at the bottom of page 7, all the way down through page 8 and halfway down through page 9 on the order of business.
Councillor Sweeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I speak in support of the amendment. We are indeed facing an unprecedented crisis for our planet, brought about by the changes which mankind alone has wrought. As Sir David Attenborough has said only this morning, the moment of crisis has come. In the face of such crisis, I hope that we can all agree in this chamber regarding this matter this evening, as it's just too serious a subject to disagree in any way. And our young people are watching us very, very closely this evening. I congratulate the young lead petitioner who has mounted her own campaign, which asks for Hillingdon Council to lead the way in tackling this threat to our continued existence on planet Earth. As our oceans heat up, fires continue to wage war in Australia, we need as a country and as a council to address this crisis as robustly as we in Britain have in the past addressed moments of crisis in our Long Island story. Therefore, the Council needs to look very closely and continuously at any of its actions which blast carbon into our atmosphere. Although the list of actions which the Council means to take would appear to be comprehensive, We need to ask ourselves, does the Council's plans go far enough? Will we actually be leading the way as our young lead petitioner asks of us? I respectfully suggest that we could be doing much, much more, as the Labour amendment shows, and that the battle we are waging needs to be more robustly fought. We need to compare our responses to other councils and other organisations who declared their own climate change emergency years ago. We need to go further so that our targets will and not may grow to encompass the Council's commercial supply chain. We need possibly a new committee to be set up solely to deal with the Council's climate change initiative. We need to engage residents at every stage. Let the banners wave out across our high streets stating that Hillingdon Council has set up a climate change public engagement programme. Finally, we must with one voice ensure that progress is made, not by mere words but actions. We have a planet tiptoeing towards disaster. Let us lead the way, as our lead petitioner demands of us. So let us all support the amended motion and not vote on just party lines for second best. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cawthorne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry to begin on a note of discord, but I'm afraid the Conservative group will not be supporting this amendment. Purely for practical reasons, not political reasons. I'll explain why. The amendment raises questions about reporting and engagement, which have, to a certain extent, already been taken account of in our new constitutional arrangements. The Corporate Services Policy and Overview Committee will pick up climate change and has new terms of reference reflecting this, and with wide discretion in terms of its engagement with community and stakeholders. Climate is also covered at executive level through the relevant Cabinet member, and there is also the annual report to Cabinet. The Environment Bill, when enacted, don't forget, is expected to include new climate-related governance requirements with impacts on local authorities. So embedding climate change within the Executive and the Policy and Overview Committee system gives us a very sound starting point. We do get the urgency, absolutely, but it really is pointless at this stage being unnecessarily prescriptive beyond that, since it is highly likely we'll have to revisit this in any case as a result of the new legislation. So I'm afraid we oppose the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Bianco, you have the right to reply. Councillor Mathers, you have the right to reply.
It is with some disappointment that we are unable to move this amendment through this evening with the intentions to come together around some ambitious and rightly needed action. I would ask of the administration that they maybe bring something back with the actions that they would want to see. I would be very willing for aspects of reporting to be revised in order that we can have a more ambitious target, particularly around a carbon zero Hillingdon into our supply chains and into the wider area. I understand particularly the threat that Heathrow Airport really faces us when it comes to getting everybody on board to become carbon zero. But I would appeal that in future council meetings there may be something that comes back cross-party that we can agree on to just add a little bit more robustness and ambition to this motion. We do support the original motion and obviously the amended because climate change is too big an issue for us to ignore. We would all want to do more and more as much as we could, and we understand there are practical ways in which we need to achieve this together. But I would ask that all of these strategies, as they are, be ambitious, involve residents, and ensure that together as a borough, as we agree on the level of the crisis and damage that global warming brings, that we have a proportionate response that really does come through in this amended motion.
We now put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour of...
Recorded vote on that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The requisite number of members have requested a recorded vote. For those present who may not be familiar with our procedures, this is a vote where I ask each member of the council in turn how they are voting. Can I just clarify? You're either voting in favour of the amendment as shown on pages 7, 8 and 9, against the amendment, or abstaining. Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Birra. Councillor Bliss. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman. Councillor Burrows. Councillor Chamdale. Councillor Tubadar. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Cawthorne. Councillor Curling. Councillor Dennis. Councillor DeVille. Councillor Dillon. Councillor Dott. Councillor Duncan. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Eginton. Councillor Farley. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Fife. Councillor Gardner. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Graham. Councillor Hagger. Councillor Hensley. Councillor Higgins. Councillor Kaufman. Councillor Lavery. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Makwana. Councillor Markham. Councillor Mathers. Councillor Melvin. Councillor Milani. Councillor D. Mills. Councillor R. Mills. Councillor Money. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Morse. Councillor Nelson. Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Prince. Councillor Puddifoot. Councillor Radia. Councillor Riley. Councillor Rodriguez. Councillor Sansapuri. Councillor Simmons. Councillor Singh. Councillor Stead. Councillor Sweeting. Councillor Tuckwell. Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Mayor.
Again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That amendment is lost. We now return to the original motion as shown on pages 6 and 7.
Councillor Cawthorne, you reserved your right. Do you wish to go further on this?
I do indeed, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. And in seconding this motion, I'm delighted to be speaking for the first time for the administration on the subject of climate change, one of the new areas within my cabinet portfolio. In doing so, I'd start by paying tribute to Councillor Bianco and the officer team for the excellent work and the many successes in this area to date, as set out in the body of the motion, which incidentally is by no means an exhaustive list. Whatever activity we engage in as a public body, I think surely what matters to us most as elected members is that we are making a practical difference and having a positive impact where we're working. And here, we are able to evidence some tangible results in carbon reduction, reducing emissions and energy efficiency savings, to give just 3 examples. Our climate-related work covers the full spectrum of council activity in all service areas. The appointment of a dedicated resource at chief officer level will help make sure that we are able to build upon this and that the climate considerations are properly reflected in policy making in a way that gives us a joined-up corporate approach. It is therefore timely that we should this evening be committing to these challenging targets as befits a forward-looking and successful local authority. Mr. Mayor, it was in the late 70s, just down the road at Dowie Martyrs, that I first heard from my geography teacher, when I was paying attention, of the early evidence of the climate changing. The climate was warming. Now, over the intervening decades, these warnings and a growing body of the most compelling evidence, together with ever more frequent and extreme weather events at home and abroad, have given rise to this climate emergency. As my children often remind me, and they're a bit older than Councillor Dennis, I'm afraid, we are merely the temporary custodians of our living environment. It falls to us all in the world of local government and beyond to rise to this challenge. Mr. Mayor, we may perhaps feel insignificant in the context of the sustained collective worldwide endeavour that we need in the situation which faces us, but it's essential that we play our part. Believe me, there will be no lack of ambition. Watch this space. Thank you.
Councillor Bianco, do you wish to wind up?
Mr. Mayor, very briefly, I think Councillor Cawthorne has made a very eloquent statement on the subject, and I will leave it there.
Mr. Mayor, it appears everybody wants a recorded vote on this one, so I will go through. So now you're voting in favour of the motion shown on pages 6 and halfway down 7, against the motion, or abstaining. Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold. Councillor Bianco. Councillor Birra. Councillor Bliss. Councillor Bridges. Councillor Brightman. Councillor Burrows, Councillor Chamdale, Councillor Troubadour, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Cawthorne, Councillor Curling, Councillor Dennis, Councillor DeVille, Councillor Dillon, Councillor Dott, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Eginton, Councillor Farley, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Fife, Councillor Gardner, Councillor Goddard, Councillor Graham, Councillor Hagger, Councillor Hensley, Councillor Higgins, Councillor Kaufman, Councillor Lavery, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Makwana, Councillor Markham, Councillor Mathers, Councillor Melvin, Councillor Milani, Councillor D. Mills, Councillor R. Mills, Councillor Money, Councillor Morgan, Councillor Morse, Councillor Nelson, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Prince, Councillor Puddifoot, Councillor Radia, Councillor Riley, Councillor Rodrigues, Councillor Sansapuri, Councillor Simmons, Councillor Singh, Councillor Stead, Councillor Sweeting, Councillor Tuckwell, Madam Deputy Mayor, Mr. Mayor.
For.
Mr. Mayor, that motion is carried unanimously.
Well, I'm very pleased that our visitors can see that we do go out with a unanimity of purpose sometimes in the council chamber. Motion 12.3, the motion from Councillor Eginton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion is a focused addition to the debate this evening. I should suggest that it represents a sensible approach to some clear failures to prepare for the climate crisis referred to by Ms. Crowther. I fear that the hope of keeping the rise in global temperatures to 5 degrees centigrade is probably too optimistic. It certainly seems clear that the world community and every one of us has to expect that a higher figure might be more realistic. And quite apart from the actions which we as individuals must make, it is for organisations and all authorities to take the lead. In doing so, it must not just be words but actions which are essential. And it shouldn't be just point scoring, as I fear might be the case on occasions tonight. In doing so, to declare a climate emergency and then to have a series of bullet points which involve nothing more than making a plan is perhaps neither cunning or anything really. The budget proposals out for consultation, although its reference was that there was £5 million for residential property, don't include a great deal about the climate emergency and therefore also nothing which is included in my motion. So let me go through some of the proposals which I've listed. At the moment, only about 25% of council homes have fitted, 25% of council homes do not have fitted condensing boilers. Indeed, more than 10% of homes owned by the council have boilers that are more than 20 years old. And I should explain the consequences, that they will involve higher fuel bills, a saving of at least 10% is to be expected. There will be higher emissions of greenhouse gases and higher risk of breakdowns. Determining the energy performance certificates for all council-owned residential properties and sharing them with the tenants would allow the council to focus on the properties to be improved. It would also serve as a useful base point to determine progress to a sustainable future with much reduced emissions, lower energy consumption and cheaper bills for council tenants. Taking the lead involves not just a plan. It requires contact with all elements of the community in Hillingdon to encourage their involvement, because the council on its own can only do so much. Establishing a robust way of communicating with all residents and commercial businesses would explain how they can prepare and reduce the risks of the climate crisis. Heathrow is a serious problem, we all know. We know that addressing and rejecting the third runway will be progress, in reducing future greenhouse gases. So unfortunately, the Member of Parliament of North Cornwall, I believe, this morning, asking to double the flights from Newquay to Heathrow was certainly not very helpful. And a related point. It seems extraordinary to me that the Cabinet member with a responsibility for the environment does not have responsibility for Hillingdon's flood strategy. The two seem to me to be very closely linked. It seems to me that, if anything, this demonstrates, dare I say, a silo mentality. Mr. Mayor, I would like to formally propose this motion.
Is there a second for that? Councillor Mathers.
I formally second and reserve my right.
Councillor Cornwall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the amendment as tabled. Members should have it in front of them. In doing so, Mr. Mayor, I will not speak at length, partly because much of what has been said in the earlier climate motion also applies here. This motion, I'm afraid, rather misses the point in my view. It's not that there is anything unworthy in what is being put forward. In fact, there is plenty that is already happening from an energy efficiency perspective, where the property team, for example, are already carrying out energy performance certification across our portfolio of housing, and there is also a rolling programme of property upgrades which deliver energy efficiencies such as new boilers, windows and lighting. I could go on. There's much more I can share, and I'm happy to share with Councillor Eginton and any other member who's interested. Mr. Mayor, to accept the substantive motion before us tonight would be to say effectively, thanks very much. These suggestions hadn't occurred to us. We'll get right on with it straight away. Clearly that's not the case. The point is, we don't do things in silos, as I've said. As I said earlier, there is a systematic corporate approach to these things, and frankly, pretty much whatever Councillor Eginton has chosen to table this evening is likely to have been identified, programme already underway, unless there is a compelling reason why that shouldn't happen. Mr. Mayor, the amendment recognises this and also corrects the notion that every last detail needs to be instigated by Cabinet and reported back to Cabinet outside the usual reporting cycle, rather than by the Cabinet member under delegations. I move the amendment. Thank you.
Is there a second for that amendment? Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I formally second the amendment and reserve my right.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor Dott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we know, climate change is a large-scale, long-term change in the planet's weather patterns and average temperature. To build a sustainable future, we must first understand that every single aspect of our life have an impact on the environment. Global temperatures have risen significantly from 20th century due to rise in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Global warming is predicted to cause potentially catastrophic climate change, rising sea levels, loss of wildlife habitat, and serious economic harm in the long term. Many impacts of the climate change have already been observed, including glacier retreat, earlier flowering of plants, changes in agricultural productivity, and impacts on human health. The Climate Change Act 2008 is the basis of the UK's approach to tackling and responding to climate change. The UK, as a world leader on climate change, achieved a large percentage of reduction in GHG emissions than other countries on average over the period of 1990 to 2005, and has set clear targets of limited global warming. Emission release in the environment from sectors such as agriculture, transport, industries, buildings, and waste management are very high in amount, and they have to be reduced. Only the domestic and transport sectors are accounted for approximately 68% of the UK's greenhouse gases emissions. Energy generation is another reason for increase of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, as it generates from fuels such as coal, natural gas and nuclear heat. As per ECUK report published in July 2019, total energy consumption in UK increased by 1.1% in 2018 to reach 143 million tons of oil equivalent, the highest level since 2013. Some of the recommendations submitted in Lord Dibben's report to tackle climate change in the UK are also similarly highlighted in Councillor Eginton's motion, upgrading as many homes as possible to improve energy efficiency by 2035, including all private, rented and fuel-poor homes by 2030. Phasing out installation of high-carbon fossil fuel heating in homes and businesses of the gas grid during the 2020s. Improving business energy efficiency by at least 20% by 2030.
Can you wind up now, Councillor?
Mr. Mayor, if something has not been done to reduce the carbon emissions soon, it will have severe effects on the environment. I fully support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the bold word, and congratulates the Conservative administration for proposing and adopting, rather politicises the whole approach to this. It's been a good debate this evening on this subject, and it's an important subject. It makes it very difficult to actually support that amendment by politicising it. This whole issue starts with human beings being individuals and doing something to change, then to groups, to governments, to councils, etc., in the whole world, to make a positive impact. And we can't politicise these issues. So, for me, Mr. Mayor, I'm afraid that amendment politicises it, and I would not be able to support this.
Are there any more speakers? Councillor Maiders, you sorry, Councillor Morgan. No?
Then go back to the move of the original motion,
which is.
Yep.
Yes, Councillor Eginton.
The spotlight falls on me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No. Councillor Eginton moved the original motion, then finally Councillor Cawthorne moved the amendment, gets to sum up.
Your turn to sum up.
After Councillor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really feel very strongly that this is not a subject which should be in this council chamber, politicised. Both the motions have been put forward, and I think that the amendment which we made to the earlier motion was not political. It was not attacking your side, and I very much therefore regret that this amendment's been put. Thank you.
Councillor Cawthorne.
I'll just briefly say in response to that, I'm probably one of these political members on my side, actually, quite honestly. I was not being political at all. I was merely highlighting, actually, the practicalities of how these things need to be dealt with constitutionally. That is all. I will say no more, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
We could put it to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against the amendment? Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That amendment is carried. That motion, now shown at the top of page 10, that becomes a substantive motion to which further amendments can be moved. If there are none, we put that to the vote.
We now move to item 12.2, which is a motion from Councillor Mills. D. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In moving this motion, this is a political commentary in terms of the general election, and like Councillor Cawthorne, I'm not very political most of the time. However, we fully welcome the decision of the government and the announcement by our local MP and Prime Minister that Hillingdon is going to get a completely new, rebuilt hospital. Not a refurbished hospital, as has been argued by the Labour Party, but a completely new rebuild. This will take time. These are long-term projects, and indeed, Mr Mayor, your own experience, you remember those days when we were discussing how we go about building Ruislip High School. It didn't happen overnight, it didn't happen in a matter of months. It does take a number of years, and this is part of the government's 40 hospital in 10-year programme, but we will make sure that Hillingdon has a strong contribution in terms of how this is going to come about, and we will be seeking as many spin-off opportunities that will come as a result of those discussions from when the work progresses from plans, designs, through to actual building and delivery. In the meantime, Hillingdon Hospital, of course, will continue in the best it can with the resources that it has. Now, the downside, of course, is that NHS Property Services, who will be dealing with this, are not particularly known, and we have several experiences in Hillingdon, not particularly known to be fast, and therefore we will need to make sure that plenty of pressure is put on at the highest level. But the general election did make it very clear in terms of the outcome that this country was going. And so therefore, what do you think the mood of Hillingdon residents? Well, it clearly was a comprehensive endorsement across all of Hillingdon for all the Conservative candidates. Over 11,000 plus majority voted more Conservative than anywhere else. So it was an endorsement not only for the Tory Boris government, but it was an endorsement for Boris himself in terms of his positive can-do approach. And it was also an endorsement, and we haven't heard this now for a few weeks, but I'm sure everyone will remember it, it was an endorsement to get Brexit done. And that's what's going to happen. But in terms of Uxbridge and South Ruislip, there was lots of talk, even on the day itself, from the BBC and from the Guardian Owen chap, and all from the Liberal elite, that this was going to be a marginal and the Prime Minister could lose his seat. Utter tosh. Complete dribble. Those of us who were out on the streets of Uxbridge and South Ruislip knew very early on that it was never going to happen. And in fact, the opposite did happen. And let me just remind you, Mr Mayor, what happened. Because of the Labour candidate's unpopular approach, because of his student politics approach to his people knocking on doors, what happened was he actually got more votes than last time. We increased our percentage than last time, and we increased our majority. Now, obviously, the Labour candidate will have to explain to all his friends that having had the many, in terms of momentum, he managed to produce the few lesser votes than previously. But that's up to him to explain. What we knew was happening in the real world was that there was a distinct connection, and people were still recognising that Hillingdon Council and what a Conservative government could do was going to be good for them in this borough. And that is what we believe happened. Our campaign was clearly more superior in terms of where it targeted, where it got through. But I have to say, the actions of our opponents motivated some of our core voters more than I've ever seen before. And for that, I think we should thank the Labour candidate for motivating our support. But the trouble is, they were in an echo chamber. They were on social media, believing what they were hearing. And they were in a very limited echo chamber. And therefore, all they heard was that they were doing well, that it was time for change. That was not what was happening. Mr Mayor, I want to actually ensure and to repeat the congratulations to my colleague, Councillor David Simmons, on his election. But of course, he's not the first leader, or even deputy leader, of Hillingdon to have been elected to a parliamentary seat. Indeed, the first deputy leader to be elected to a Hillingdon seat was in 1983, Terry Dix, when he won Hayes and Harlington. And long may you continue longer than he managed in Hayes and Harlington. But your knowledge and experience will no doubt inform the discussions and debate that we need to have with government. And finally, Mr Mayor, I have a confession to make about the election. I think somewhere still within the Labour Party, they've still got me down as a Jeremy Corbyn fan.
Is there a second for that? Councillor R. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second this motion, and in doing so also recognise the clear outcome that the electorate of the UK delivered, also across Hillingdon, along with the promising news about a new Hillingdon Hospital located within my own ward of Brunel. I too congratulate all those elected for constituencies within our borough, and again highlight the election of Councillor David Simmons in Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner. Very much looking forward to having one of our own as a member of government, to the beneficial links and influence that this will bring us. But Mr. Mayor, I also want to take this opportunity to thank our excellent electoral services team, but then to reflect on the election in the constituency of the ward I represent, that of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. We now have a one-nation Conservative government, bringing our country together, but unfortunately the same could not be said for Labour in Hillingdon during the campaign, with a distinct lack of volunteering or campaign involvement from any of their elected group helping out in Uxbridge and South Ruislip. Probably, in fairness to many, they looked at how it was being organised, what was going on, and decided they didn't want to have any part of it either. So we had an opposition that consisted of third-party campaigns, including open-top buses, people shouting expletives in the middle of a weekend afternoon, shadow cabinet member visits, the National Labour Party battle bus, bringing the ever-popular and articulate Richard Bergen to town, complaints from local residents in South Ruislip when Owen Jones and Ash Starker were rolled out, people's doors being knocked on late at night and them coming to us asking how can we help them do something about it. Labour Party staff employed, along with hundreds of outside resources brought in, many from so far outside they had no idea about local issues. And I know they didn't know about local issues, as I asked them when they knocked on my door. Putting the clear Labour Party Brexit policy to one side, I was receiving of a clueless look when I asked what the view on Uxbridge Police Station was. A canvasser then shocked to learn that the Labour Party in Hillingdon called keeping this local facility open a vanity project. Come election day, a mad rush of hundreds of people, not knowing where they were going, charging around Uxbridge and South Ruislip with maps in hand, like a crazed freshers event, a student treasure hunt gone wrong. And the result of all of this, Mr. Mayor, despite us having to listen for months that history was going to be made, as mentioned, the Conservative candidate increasing his number of votes, his share of the vote, and of course with this, his majority. The Labour candidate, having brought in all these resources that could have been deployed defending target seats for them, gets a lower number of votes, a lower share of the vote, and takes them backwards. But not to worry, Mr. Mayor, they gained some more Twitter follows, so the important things have been achieved. So bring back Richard Bergen, bring Owen Jones and Ash Sarker again. The more they come here, the better we do. We are ready for future elections whenever they come. And in 2022, we will be campaigning across Hillingdon with our first target, winning back Heathrow villages. Mr. Mayor, I'm delighted to second this motion, recognise the clear vote made by the people of the UK in December, and look forward to seeing the progress made with Hillingdon Hospital.
Councillor Dillon.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. We note that the Council notes the decisive outcome of recent general election and welcomes the statement made by the Prime Minister the new hospital would be built in Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. The Council agrees that it will work with health authorities at both local and national level to ensure that all phases of this project are in line with putting our residents first. The Council further notes that John McDonnell was returned as an MP for Hayes and Harlington and that one of its members, Councillor David Simmons, congratulations David, was successful in becoming local MP for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner, and looks forward to him raising issues with the government to the benefit of the council and the local government in general. That's the motion. I agree with it. I don't know what those speeches...
Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support this motion and welcome the overall increase in the Conservative votes that were achieved during this historic election. I too would like to congratulate my friend and colleague, Councillor David Simmons, on being elected to Parliament by the constituents of Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner. I am sure members will agree he has been a credit to this council over many years, and he continues to fight for our residents in Parliament. He will be missed for the tireless work he has done within Hillingdon. His maiden speech in Parliament shows how much of an asset he is for the government, with a clear understanding of national issues as well as their impact on our local residents. Unsurprisingly, John McDonnell retained his seat in Hayes and Harlington, but I'm delighted by the inroads that were made by my Conservative colleague and friend, Councillor Wayne Bridges. reducing Labour's majority from just over 18,000 to just over 9,000, effectively cutting the majority in half. I think this clearly shows that the Conservative message, both nationally and more importantly locally, is really hitting home. Long may these gains in Hayes and Harlington continue. And finally, with such a decisive Conservative win in Parliament, returning our Uxbridge and South Ruislip member, the Right Honourable Boris Johnson, to number 10, the whole country can move forward to deliver Brexit and locally deliver a new hospital in Hillingdon. Mr. Mayor, I fully support this motion.
Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to support the motion. I firstly associate myself with the comments of my colleagues in relation to Councillor Simmons, who will be an outstanding MP for our area. On the 12th of December, the British people were faced with a choice: to re-elect a Conservative government which has presided over a decade of continuous economic growth, or elect a fiscally incontinent Labour Party which promised to spend tens of billions of public money on ideological pet projects such as nationalising our electricity, our water, and yes, even our internet, all paid for from the proceeds of the fabled magic money tree belonging to Mr. John McDonnell. This was rather reminiscent of the choice the people of Hillingdon faced in May 2018 when they were asked to choose between a Conservative administration with a proud track record of sound financial management and investment in public services, or a Labour Party that wished to turn our council into a cooperative. On both occasions, the people chose to elect the party they knew they could trust to spend their money wisely, and the one that they knew would fund their priorities, whether that is a new hospital at Hillingdon or the largest school rebuilding programme in London, including 2 new schools in my own ward over the last 4 years. What they also know is it's only through sound financial management that such capital projects are deliverable. We all remember the state the Labour Party left our public finances in 2010, with the money having run out, and also some of us, although not myself, but certain councillors, are old enough to remember the state the Labour Party left the finances of Hillingdon Council the last time there was a Labour administration here. The general election showed that it's only under sound Conservative financial management that new schools and hospitals can be successfully delivered, and that those are the priorities of the people, not Labour's ideological gimmicks.
Councillor Riley.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for allowing me to speak, but before I do, can I register my shock at the unwarranted attack on my fellow North Cornwall citizens? As a proud Cornishman, to have the metropolitan elite having a go at the rural community really isn't good enough. It is my mother's 90th birthday on Saturday, and I only hope that my brothers in Cornwall are able to stop her from marching up here and taking Councillor Eginton to task. I'm sure that they will. I support this motion, of course, and what drew me first to it was this. Council agrees that it will work with health authorities at both local and national level to ensure that all phases of this project, meaning the hospital, are in line with putting our residents first. This administration and this council has a proud record of dealing and helping with our health partners, and I am the proud chairman of the External Services Select Committee, whose large part of work is holding to account and scrutinising a number of our health partners and dealing with very senior members of those health partnerships. We have a equally proud track record in that committee of success, and as Councillor Bianco would put it, good news stories. Indeed, last year we were able to facilitate by bringing together very senior members of different health partnerships in order to review and scrutinise the appalling closure of Michael Sobel House, which over a series of meetings witnessed by many, many tens of residents, they came along in great numbers worried about that incident. But we are proud and pleased to report that we have managed to facilitate the reversal of that terrible closure, and now the unit is perhaps not if entirely up and running as it should be, then very much well on the way to doing so. So in terms of a new hospital, we will be there at committee level, at cabinet level, and indeed, of course, the leader, making sure that the hospital is right and fit for purpose, for putting our residents first, as we always do. It's an important project. We will deliver the very best hospital that is possible. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There are two more people who've signalled to speak. Councillor Prince first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to congratulate Councillor Simmons for being elected to Parliament. His expertise on children's issues will be a huge asset to the House, and I saw that his maiden speech during the Brexit bill was about refugee children, which I found both appropriate and informative. And I look forward to seeing what issues Councillor Simmons raises from the backbenches of Parliament. On the issue of the hospital, I welcome a new building, but buildings are not everything. I, for one, was alarmed to hear of Hillingdon A&E struggling to meet its targets. I was concerned to hear of sick children being left in the Hillingdon A&E waiting room for 11 hours. The Conservatives have their majority. The Prime Minister represents a constituency in this borough. Conservative councillors have used this motion to make a few digs about the election, but there is nobody more to blame for failing NHS services other than the Conservative Party.
Councillor Curling.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also start my speech by congratulating Councillor Simmons MP on his election to Parliament. I know he'll make a very good local constituency MP for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner. I'd also like to put party politics to one side and also thank those other members in this chamber who put themselves forward for election but were not successful. Mr. Mayor, the other aspect of this motion is that of Hillingdon Hospital, which has a long history of what can be described as missed opportunities when it comes to being rebuilt. In the late 1980s, or possibly the early 1990s, the plan was to build 4 mini tower blocks, 2 along Piltheath Road and 2 along Royal Lane. This project seemed to run out of money before it even got off the drawing board, and then the next missed opportunity that most residents will repeat is that when RAF Uxbridge closed, the opportunity was missed to have a new hospital built on that site. That again seems to have been failed due to a lack of finances. For the last couple of years, there have been tentative plans for a partnership between the hospital and Brunel University for a new hospital on the old garden centre site. However, this doesn't seem to have progressed very much, and I gather there is now a new debate as to whether to pursue this option or to go for a rebuild on the existing site. Meanwhile, the buildings and the infrastructure are continuing to decay and deteriorate, with the closure of the children's wards due to subsidence and a series of temporary buildings and extensions to ensure that the hospital can continue to operate. Things are in a serious state of decay, and the residents of Hillingdon must not suffer another missed opportunity for a new hospital. It is therefore disappointing that Hillingdon is not one of the 6 new hospital refurbishments, rebuilds, whatever they are, that the Prime Minister has announced. It's not even in the next tranche either, and it seems to be somewhere in the 40 promised at some time, but with only minimal seed funding. The previous missed opportunities all failed due to lack of finances, so I'm sure that we all want to keep the Prime Minister to his word, and as such, perhaps the new MP for Ruislip Northwood Pinner can use his new office to lobby his constituency neighbour to let us all know when the current options, which are the current options he favours, and when he will give a green light for the full allocation of the funding required to turn his words into actions and deliver his promises. The residents have given him their trust. He now needs to give them a firm date as to when they can expect their new hospital to be built. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Puddifoot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might be able to enlighten Councillor Curling a little. I'm meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow to discuss this, as we regularly do. It was not capable of putting it in the first 6 to be announced because it simply wasn't ready, and that is not acceptable. The NHS property services are a basket case, without a shadow of a doubt. The 500 million has been set aside for Hillingdon Hospital, and it will be made available, and the Prime Minister is urging it to get a move on. The funding's been made available for some temporary buildings. The funding is available for master planning. They need to get on and do it. Now, that might be seeming a little harsh. I'm not expecting to be harsh on the trust. They're not geared up to do it. They're going to have to employ outside professionals to do this, but they need to get on and do it. And I will be discussing this with the Prime Minister tomorrow, who really is putting the boot behind this, and I do expect to see some action.
Councillor Simmons.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to add my strong support to those comments. I spoke to the Prime Minister yesterday after Prime Minister's questions. I have a meeting coming up with Sir Amias Morse, who, as well as being the new chairman of the Hillingdon Hospitals Trust, is also the new chair to cover the North West London group of CCGs, to take a more strategic view of the financial situation. I think for all of us members in this chamber, Hillingdon is our hospital. It's certainly where I've taken my children when they've had falls and needed urgent attention out of hours, and it is, albeit in a terrible building, a fantastic facility for all of our residents to access. The problem with it is the buildings are rubbish and they are falling to bits. And if I've learnt something in my time working with Councillor Puddiford, it's that these kind of big capital projects do not need the attention of NHS property services. They need regular flogging from those who want to see them delivered. Conservatives tend to attract votes from people who want to see action on these issues, not words, and I will be pursuing it as vigorously as the leader and the Prime Minister, with a view to getting this delivered as quickly as possible.
Councillor Mills, do you wish to wind up?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I think the Leader and the Deputy Leader have made it very clear what I've tried to say in terms of this motion. The importance of this is very important, but we recognise that a lot of work needs to go in to ensure that it is going to be delivered, and delivered in a way that will benefit all residents of Hillingdon. And it is one of the massive projects. The advantage, of course, that Hillingdon can bring to this debate is that we have, over the last 10 years, invested an awful lot in different types of infrastructure in this borough, whether it be the libraries, or whether it be new school buildings, or whether it will be some of the leisure facilities that we have become renowned for. Therefore, we do have a track record of knowing how we go about trying to make ideas turn into reality. And I have every confidence that all of us will continue to ensure that all our MPs in Hillingdon are indeed on board with ensuring that we get the Hillingdon Hospital. But this motion was a bit more than that. It was a motion that did actually confirm that this election was an utter rejection of Labour Corbyism and everything that it stands for. It was a rejection of the student politics and the disrespect that was shown to many of the residents across Hillingdon, particularly in the Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency, as my colleagues have talked about. But it was also, I think, a time to pause and reflect about what residents actually expect from their politicians. And I think on this side of the chamber, we are very confident that we remain in touch and that we remain putting residents first. But I am more than happy if Hillingdon Labour Party continue to think that they won the argument on December the 12th. Because if that is winning, then I don't know what losing really looks like.
We put it to the vote then. All those in favour? Unanimous again. Thank you. Motion 12.4 from Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, the Brambles, Laurel Lane, Station Road, Bramford Road, Warwick Road, we can all list names of streets in our wards that are affected by the blight of fly tipping. Hourly, daily, weekly, we can all list the frequency we receive emails, tweets and calls in regards to the blight of fly tipping. And our residents want to know we are doing all we can to respond to their concerns. They want to know that we as council will go to all lengths to resolve the issues that make their lives harder. We must continue to strive for our residents. This often includes championing their cause with other organisations, authorities, government that have control and influence to improve their situation. Fly tipping is a blight on our communities. It undermines the pride people have on where they live. It costs the taxpayer huge amounts of money. and we should be spending this on vital services. And rightly so, residents look to us to do something about this growing issue. We know that we're currently in a major review in the Residents, Education and Environmental Policy and Overview Committee in regards to what we can do to take an action on fly tipping within the powers that we have. And this was welcomed by all councillors within that committee on both sides to ensure that we can eliminate the problem and reduce issues within our powers. And the outcome will be due over coming months. From my involvement of this review, it's clear that for residents, it's clear that education for residents is best to help dispose of waste and bulky items that continue to blight our streets. That the education of residents will support them in order that they may help us have pride in where we live. However, there are some, residents or not, who see fly tipping as something that is their right to do. And there needs a carrot and stick approach to this. We need to be tough on those deliberately breaking the law and decentivise those who reoffend. And unfortunately, within the limits we have in the law, we're not able to do that as a local authority. And this motion calls on the government or the cabinet to talk to the government in order that they may give us more power and more opportunity to resolve this issue of fly tipping. Courts giving tougher guidance and maximum penalties will deter. Increased use of fines with that money coming to the councils who remove the rubbish will mean that local services will not suffer because money is not spent removing waste but on other things that residents need. There are areas we cannot influence, and we need the support of government in order to get powers. This Conservative government has had 10 years to help us resolve the issue of fly tipping. And although there may have been some announcements recently today around large criminal fly tipping, we still need support and powers around the local issues and an increase of fine, amongst other things. Our residents want to know what we're doing, and they'll see some of the review at the POC. They also want to know that we will use all we can to influence, encourage and coax other authorities and governments to help us in resolving this issue. We need results that can cover our costs, results that residents can be proud of, results where courts echo our efforts locally in challenging this issue, and ultimately results that champion the concerns of our residents. I move.
Is that seconded? Councillor Nelson.
Mr. Mayor, I second this motion. Every day our residents inform us of fly tipping in their areas. You can often find it on the pavement, in brambles, walkways, in parks. You name the places, you will see fly tipping. In 2017, this council paid over £500,000 to clear a massive amount of fly tipping off the old Bath Road in my ward, Heathrow Villages. Mr. Mayor, how much more of this can our residents put up with? The Department of Environment statistics on fly tipping incidents recorded by the local authorities in England 2018-2019 have dealt with over 1 million fly tipping incidents within with two-thirds of it household waste. In Heathrow Villages, this is a daily occurrence, to the point it has become an epidemic. The amount of MEs submitted for fly tipping by the ward councillors and our residents is too numerous to mention. This is a constant eyesore in their locality. Covert surveillance must be used to identify and prosecute the repeated offenders. There needs to be big, bold signage in areas highlighting fly tippers will be prosecuted. There needs to be uses of these discreet cameras to catch the culprit if it continues. Be rest assured that no sooner has the rubbish been cleared that the fly tippers are back again. Hence the calls for tackling the issue for the long term. We ask that this council lobby the government to raise the fines and penalties and give local authority more power to prosecute the individual and enforce the law. I move.
Councillor Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is recognised, and I think every ward councillor does understand the issue, because it is one that comes up far too often, that fly tipping has been increasing and is becoming more persistent. And it is something that, as a local council, we've endeavoured to try to tackle, but it is right that there is need for more support. But I'm moving the amendment because it is a distinction in approach again. And the amendment quite clearly points out that the Labour Party manifesto, which we've just had a general election on, made no reference to the need to actually take any further action regarding to enforcing powers and giving local authorities greater powers on fly tipping, whilst the government's manifesto, which is now obviously going to be implemented, quite clearly recognised that there was a need for local authorities to have further powers. And I'm pleased to say that the government, through its Environment Bill, is already moving to ensure that local government have further powers to be able to deal with this unsightly issue and to be more proactive in responding to the constant problems that many residents are facing. Government is also recognising that fines in itself may not be the solution here, and that they are giving strong consideration. And indeed the Secretary of State has made comments now about the need to have criminal sanctions as well added on, and I think we would welcome that from our perspective as an authority that has indeed been suffering of late. But as Hillingdon, what has our response been whilst we wait for these extra powers? We have been taking positive action, and we are starting to see early signs of maybe some encouraging results. The implementation of our comprehensive CCTV programme, which we began in the last financial year and is programmed to continue in the next financial year, will indeed give us a much better coverage throughout the borough and indeed better linkage with the police and other agencies to be able to identify and spot who the main offenders consistently are. We are also, of course, promoting and have promoted a free collection service for all our residents of bulky refuse, something which I believe is quite unique to Hillingdon, which encourages residents to contact us and allow us to remove rather than them having to fly tip. But I would like to say that on costs, we are also making progress. We have a case on the go at the moment where we are being allowed to recover up to £60,000 of our costs against a fly tipper, and that in itself will not only be successful on that particular case, but it will enable to send a very strong message out that this is not financially worthwhile to those visiting the area and fly tipping. It's going to take time again to get the message there, but this authority is very much on line with what we're doing, and our amendment strengthens, with the government support, what we need to do. I move.
Is the amendment seconded?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally second this amendment and reserve my rights.
Councillor Sweeting on the amendment.
I speak against the amendment. Fly tipping is indeed a menace which affects all areas of the borough. It is like an ever-encroaching plague affecting streets and green spaces alike, polluting areas and causing much grief to residents. It's also a huge financial drain on the council, eating into monies which could be spent on improving services and the lives of our residents. We on the Labour side of this chamber are indeed very concerned about the fly tipping menace and are constantly submitting hundreds of members' inquiries on this very issue, as many of us have higher ward populations and more properties, including flats in our wards. However, the current maximum £400 fine is no deterrent, has been discussed and noted and agreed during the major review discussions and witness sessions being currently undertaken by ReSpot committee. Many recommendations will be coming to this committee, advising the council of ways and means of doing things better. However, as with other motions being considered tonight, the council can and must do more now. By requiring central government to play its part, as the motion asks, we are merely doing what residents would want us to do by asking government to take from residents some of the financial burden they are having to bear. All we are asking for is for the council to use its special relationship with government to speak up for the people of Hillingdon. The watered-down amendment with puerile comments about whether or not Labour put this issue in their manifesto is hardly helpful, and I would suggest does not concentrate on the present, as it fails to put the views of Hillingdon residents first. If Labour members were not concerned about the effect of fly tipping on our residents, why do we do weekly and sometimes daily drive rounds pointing out sacks of rubbish? Working with government as appropriate, as the amendment states, is such an anemic statement as to suggest very little conversations may happen. The substantive motion provides the bite which Hillingdon residents deserve. I thank you.
Councillor Puddifoot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The request to approach the government about fly tipping fines was almost word for word issued by the Labour group in Westminster last month. It was something that was requested on day one. The local government association Labour groups ask of an incoming Labour government. And it does say in here, council should be free to levy larger fines for anti-social crimes such as fly tipping. Whilst given the results of the election, the ask was academic, what was extremely disappointing was that the Labour Party nationally in its manifesto did not deal with the issue at all, whereas the Conservative manifesto did. We will crack down on the waste and carelessness that destroys our natural environment and kills marine life. We will increase penalties for fly tipping. We will work with a government that has that in its manifesto, and it's right that this is of concern to councils of all political persuasions across this country. We do want something done about it, but we need a government, and we've got a government that intends to do it. That's what we need to work with.
There are no more speakers other than the Councillor Kaufman who reserved his right. Okay. Councillor Mathers is the mover of the original motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've learned a few things this evening. One, that I can't use my glasses when giving speeches because I can't get used to looking around. I'll take that on the experience front. The other is that, unfortunately, as Hillingdon Labour continues to offer practical solutions, shared with the experience of other Labour councils in London, the Hillingdon Conservatives just make political quips. The original motion was designed to offer calls of practical solutions. To increase fines for local authority, ideally at £2,000, against fly tipping, to ensure that that revenue is used to investigate and prosecute fly tippers, and to ask for additional revenue, local authorities be reimbursed, and that they review the guidance to court. So the courts are supporting and echoing what we believe needs to happen. The amendment also dilutes action that gives us more tools to our arsenal in order to tackle fly tipping, and instead offers empty promises with phrasing which is unhelpful, such as appropriate. As we were mentioning manifestos, the Labour Regional Party manifesto highlights that nearly a decade of Tory neglect has led to more litter on our streets, with reported incidents of fly tipping rising by 23% across London. We are serious about tackling this issue. If the Conservatives want to play politics, instead of listening to important residents' concerns, that's up to them. Mr. Mayor, I ask, what harm is there in the leader of the council tomorrow asking his friend the Prime Minister to ingest the concerns of his constituents by introducing the practical solutions in the original motion? Our residents have called for us to influence, to provide possible solutions, to issues that affect their lives. And this Conservative administration are clearly not willing to do that, and to do all that they can to champion the concerns of Hillingdon residents.
Councillor Mills to wind up.
Mr. Mayor, there is a distinction politically between our approach and the Labour Party's approach, not just on this but on many things, and we've heard it tonight on a number of occasions, but I think we've heard it for a number of weeks. The Labour Party, whether it's at a national level or at Hillingdon Labour level, they just love to talk about how they would do things and how they can do this and who they would consult with and what would be the best outcomes. Our political difference with them is that we actually get on and deliver things. And that is evidenced by everything you look around in Hillingdon as an authority in terms of what we have delivered, and that is the fundamental difference as to why we have as many councillors on this side, and they only have half the number, because residents are absolutely fed up with talk, talk, talk. They want politicians to get out there and resolve the problem. Hillingdon Conservatives put their residents first. Hillingdon Conservatives solve problems. A Boris government is going to solve the problems whether they like it or not, and that is what we've got for the next 5, 10, 15 years. That's what's so encouraging.
Okay, we're now voting on the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? The amendment is carried.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That becomes a substantive motion as shown on page 12, to which further amendments can be moved, or if there are none, we need to vote on that.
So we're voting on the substantive motion now. All those in favour? All those against?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is carried. Just before you close the meeting, could I remind all members to remain in the chamber once the Mayor has left? We just need to do the mini bobbing up and down version as shown on page 13.
Can I also remind councillors that there is food and drink in the Mayor's Parlour. I look forward to seeing those of you who normally turn up.